You are on Tips and Streams with your host, Coca.
What's good, everyone? Welcome back to Tips and Streams. I'm Koken, and I hope you're doing well and feeling locked in wherever you're listening from. All right, let's get to the daily picks. I've got 4 NBA matchups on the card today, so buckle up. We're diving straight into the action. The first prediction for today's NBA game is for the matchup between the Boston Celtics and Atlanta Hawks. When I look at this matchup in Atlanta, I start by focusing on rhythm, context, and timing. And everything about this spot points me toward Boston. Not just to win, but to handle business the right way. Boston comes into this game playing confident basketball, especially away from home. I've been impressed by how this group has adjusted without Jason Tatum. Instead of panicking or forcing shots, they've leaned into balance, spacing, and discipline. That comeback win against Miami said a lot to me. Falling behind early on the road, staying composed, and then closing hard in the fourth quarter, that's the kind of response I expect from a veteran team that knows how to win ugly when needed. What really stands out to me is how well Boston has defended lately. The rotations are sharper, the closeouts are cleaner, and they've done a great job protecting the paint without overcommitting. They don't gamble much, but they force tough decisions, and that matters against an Atlanta team that wants to play fast and move the ball. Boston doesn't need to control pace, they just need to control mistakes, and they've been excellent at that. Offensively, this Celtics team has found a reliable identity. Jaylen Brown has stepped into a true leadership role, and he's been setting the tone with his shot creation and physicality. Add in Anthony Simons giving them instant offense and confidence off the bench, and suddenly Boston has multiple ways to punish defensive lapses. I also like how unselfish they've been. They don't chase numbers, they chase matchups. Now, on the other side, Atlanta is in a tricky spot. I respect their talent, and I like parts of their roster, but this is not an ideal situation for them. They're coming off a long road trip. The legs look heavy, and defensively they've been struggling to sustain intensity for 4 quarters. When Atlanta's shots aren't falling, things can unravel quickly, especially late in games. Atlanta plays at one of the fastest tempos in the league, but speed without structure can be dangerous against a disciplined opponent. Boston thrives when teams rush possessions or force passes, and Atlanta has shown signs of that when under pressure. I also can't ignore how inconsistent the Hawks have been at home this season. The energy comes and goes, and against a locked-in road team, that's a problem. Yes, Atlanta has covered spreads in certain underdog spots before, but this number feels short for a reason. I don't see enough defensive resistance to slow Boston down when it matters most. If this game is tight in the final stretch, I trust Boston's execution, decision-making, and composure far more. So when I break it all down, recent form, matchup dynamics, travel fatigue, and late-game trust, the angle becomes clear to me. I'm taking the Boston Celtics to win and cover the 2-point spread in Atlanta. I trust their structure, their defense, and their ability to close. This feels like a professional road win, and I'm riding with Boston here. Today's second prediction is for the game between the Oklahoma City Thunder and Miami Heat. When I break down this Thunder-Heat matchup, I'm looking far beyond the headline number and straight into how this game is actually going to breed for 48 minutes in Miami. On paper, Oklahoma City walks in with the edge, the momentum, and the defensive muscle. But games like this are never decided on paper. They're decided in rhythm, execution, and how clean each team plays when the pressure tightens late. I watched the previous meeting closely, and while Oklahoma City won comfortably, that scoreline hides some important context. Miami didn't lose that game because they couldn't score. They lost it because they beat themselves. Uncharacteristic giveaways turned into easy points the other way, and against a team like the Thunder, that's a death sentence. I don't expect that same level of sloppiness again, especially on Miami's home floor. From Oklahoma City's side, what jumps off the screen to me is their defensive consistency. They don't gamble. They don't chase highlights. They suffocate space. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander controls tempo like a veteran point guard trapped in a scorer's body. And when the Thunder lock in defensively, they force opponents to grind for every touch. That's why even when their shooting cools, they stay in control of games. They don't panic. They trust the system. Miami, on the other hand, is built differently. This is a team that survives on effort, pace, and defensive discipline. Even without the star power they once leaned on, they compete possession by possession. At home, they're far more comfortable absorbing pressure, slowing the game down when needed, and making opponents earn everything. Bam Adebayo anchors that identity, and when Miami keeps the turnovers in check, they become very difficult to separate from. What really matters for me here is game flow. Oklahoma City doesn't dominate Eastern Conference opponents the same way they do teams out west, especially on the road. They win, but not always by blowing doors off. Miami tends to hang around, shorten games late, and force favorites to execute in the final minutes. That's exactly the type of setup where a large spread becomes uncomfortable. I expect Oklahoma City to control most of the night defensively, but I also expect Miami to respond with better ball movement, fewer mistakes, and enough scoring punch to stay within striking distance. This feels like a game where the Thunder lead for long stretches, Miami makes late pushes, and the final margin comes down to execution in the closing possessions. My money is on the Thunder to cover the 8-point spread in Miami. I trust their defense, their composure, and their ability to close games. I don't see them running away with it, but I also don't see them collapsing late. To me, this has all the signs of a tight finish, one where the difference between 6 and 10 points is decided in the final seconds. I'm riding with Oklahoma City to do just enough. The third prediction for today is for the game between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the San Antonio Spurs. When I look at this matchup between Minnesota and San Antonio, I see a game that the market is trying to simplify, but the reality on the floor is much more layered than that. On paper, yes, this is a classic spot where people lean into rest advantage and home court. But when I break this game down possession by possession, matchup by matchup, I don't see a scenario where San Antonio runs away with it. Minnesota comes into this one playing some of the most connected basketball I've seen from them all season. This team has found a rhythm on both ends of the floor, especially defensively, where their ability to shrink the paint and force tough looks has been consistent. Even in recent road spots, they've shown they can stay composed when the game turns physical and slow, and that matters a lot in a building like this. The back-to-back angle is the main talking point, but I'm not buying it as a deal breaker. Anthony Edwards sitting out the previous game wasn't about waving a white flag. It was about protecting the engine. That matters. When he's fresh, his downhill pressure bends defenses in a way that completely changes how Minnesota operates. His presence alone creates space for others to make quicker decisions, cleaner cuts, and easier reads. That's not something San Antonio can simply scheme away. On the other side, I respect what the Spurs have built at home. They play with confidence early, they rebound well, and they do a good job setting the tone physically. But I've watched this team closely, and when they're asked to separate from disciplined opponents, that's where things get tricky. They win a lot of games by execution and balance, not by blowing teams off the floor. Against the Minnesota squad that knows how to grind, that margin shrinks fast. I also keep coming back to the recent history between these teams. Minnesota hasn't just competed in these matchups, they've controlled them. Even when the score tightened late, they stayed poised, trusted their defensive principles, and executed when it mattered. That's not accidental. That's familiarity and confidence showing up at the right time. From a game flow standpoint, I expect a measured pace, plenty of half-court possessions, and stretches where both teams have to work for every bucket. That type of game favors the team that can stay organized late, not necessarily the team with the louder crowd. I'm taking the Minnesota Timberwolves to cover the spread against the San Antonio Spurs in San Antonio. Even if the Spurs manage to protect their floor and come out on top, I don't see them creating real separation. This feels like a game that stays tight deep into the fourth, and I'm riding with Minnesota to keep it within the number. This line is asking too much, and I'm not buying it. Today's last prediction is for the game between the Washington Wizards and the Denver Nuggets. When I look at this matchup between the Washington Wizards and the Denver Nuggets, the first thing that jumps off the page for me is context. This is not just about talent. This is about timing, legs, rotation depth, and expectations baked into the number. Denver is clearly the better basketball team. I'm not debating that. Even without Nikola Jokic, I've watched this group respond with structure, ball movement, and discipline. Jamal Murray has stepped into a leadership role. The offense still flows, and at home, they know how to control the pace. I fully expect Denver to win this game. But betting is never about who wins. It's about how the game plays out. Washington comes into this spot on a back-to-back, with travel, altitude, and a short rotation working against them. On paper, this screams trouble. And I'll be honest, this is a Wizards team I rarely trust. They don't lose close very often. When things go south, they tend to unravel quickly. That's exactly why this line bothers me. 14 points is an enormous cushion, especially against a Denver team that is winning games by execution, not by blowing teams off the floor. Without Jokic, Denver has been far more methodical. They build leads, they manage possessions, and once they're comfortable, they shift into control mode instead of pushing the margin. I've watched Denver in spots like this before. They'll get up double digits, slow the tempo, shorten the game, and live with a win that never feels threatened, but also never stretches into a 20-point statement. Washington, for all their flaws, still has young legs, shot makers who can score in bunches, and absolutely nothing to lose. I don't need them to be good. I don't need them to be efficient. I just need them to compete enough to hang around the back door. And that's where spreads like this crack. Denver has every reason to protect bodies, manage minutes, and focus on the next game. Washington, meanwhile, can lose by 8, 9, or 10 and still cash this ticket. That margin matters a lot. So while I expect Denver to control the game and come out on top, I don't see the urgency or the roster situation lining up for a runaway result. I'm taking the Washington Wizards to cover the 14-point spread. Denver wins the game, but Washington stays close enough to make this number too big to ignore. This is a classic spot where the scoreboard lies to the betting market, and I'm riding with the points.